Lesson 2. Verbal de-escalation techniques and handling non-violent crisis situations. When someone is extremely annoyed, angry, or afraid, they may react with hostility toward the person or situation that caused these feelings. This can often lead to conflict between two or more people, which might include verbal arguments or even physical violence. In some situations, the person may enter a state of crisis. A person who is in crisis may be especially dangerous during a conflict. Because they are highly agitated, they may act on their emotions without stopping to consider the consequences, which could bring harm to themselves or others. Knowing how to effectively calm a person in crisis, known as crisis de-escalation or intervention, is a highly valuable skill for security professionals and frontline workers. However, de-escalation can be a complicated task. The intervening person must be able to assess the situation and react in a way that will disarm it rather than inflame it. They must understand what has upset the person in crisis and know which words and actions have the best chance of calming them down. Spotting the signs of crisis. To begin, it's important to note that the goal of de-escalation is to diffuse crises before they reach the point of physical aggression or violence. When you talk about nonviolent crisis intervention, some people immediately think of holding skills and how to protect yourself from physical attacks. But that's only a small chunk of it. According to the GCT verbal de-escalation and crisis intervention model, the person doing de-escalation must think about the safety and well-being of everyone involved in a crisis situation. The main philosophy is care, welfare, safety, and security for all. It's not just for the person who's in crisis and the person handling the crisis. It's also for any people who are witnessing the event. The first element of successful de-escalation is early identification that a crisis may be developing. Many factors go into this process, but it largely involves being aware of the person's behavior and the larger situation at hand. Assessing what's in the room and who is in the room. Assessing nonverbal communication because it's not what someone says, but how they say it. Looking at facial expressions, looking at body language, looking at the spatial piece, like how close they are to me and how close you are to the exit. Looking at how they're speaking, their tone, their volume, and their cadence. Once you assess the potential for crisis or how far the crisis has already progressed, you can begin to determine the appropriate response. Strategies for verbal de-escalation. Whenever possible, de-escalation should begin with a conversation between the person in crisis and the person attempting to intervene, otherwise known as verbal de-escalation. As always, the goal is to diffuse the situation by making the agitated person feel heard, understood, and respected. The way you speak to a person during de-escalation is just as important as the words you say to them. You should talk about paraverbal and nonverbal communication. Paraverbal communication is the tone, the volume, and the cadence. For example, you immediately ask everybody, who speaks sarcasm as a second language? Because if you approach someone with sarcastic, dry humor to try to lighten the mood, it's going to make it worse. Put the sarcasm away and just use very natural, even-keeled, even-toned patterns of communication. The volume of our speech is also important in these situations, and we can even use it to help lower the level of tension. Sometimes if somebody is screaming and yelling, you'll bring your volume down a notch, and sometimes they'll match me. And you'll bring it down a bit more, and they'll match you again until you're having a nice, even, calm conversation. Other strategies for verbal de-escalation include lowering yourself to the other person's eye level if you are taller than them, which can make you appear less threatening, persuading them to sit down with you, which can help them feel more calm, and standing beside them rather than across from them, which can make the conversation feel less confrontational. It's also important to remember that the individual in crisis may respond negatively to your de-escalation attempts, so you should try not to take any insults or aggression personally. Staying centered during de-escalation. Unfortunately, crisis de-escalation can be very stressful work. It can be difficult to deal with aggression and negativity without reflecting it back to the person in crisis. Therefore, we need to know how to manage our own emotions and mental well-being in order to stay focused and effective during de-escalation. Self-awareness is the first component of this. In order to regulate our emotions, we need to monitor how we feel and understand what things are likely to upset us. What makes you anxious? What are the things that make you fearful? What are you worried about? Once you know the answers to these questions, you'll be better prepared to handle upsetting words and actions without becoming agitated. Self-care is another vital part of maintaining resilience. Dealing with other people's crises is mentally and emotionally taxing. which is why we must find ways to replenish that spent energy. As security professionals and frontline workers, you're absorbing so much negative energy that you need to do something positive to fill up your care cup. You're pouring so much out that if you don't fill it up again, you're not going to be useful anymore. Normal wellness behaviors like getting plenty of sleep, eating a healthy diet, exercising regularly, and practicing mindfulness can help with this. De-escalating with a team can be an excellent option if others are available to help. In these situations, one person can lead the de-escalation while the others provide support as needed. When you respond as a team, sometimes the leader is the first person who arrives, sometimes it's the person who has the best rapport with the individual, and sometimes it's just the person who is most competent and confident. Conflict and crisis can be frightening and stressful when they occur. A person who is experiencing an emotional crisis may pose a danger to themselves and others, which is why proper de-escalation is so important. We encourage you to use the information and strategies in this lesson when attempting to de-escalate someone who is in crisis. However, you shouldn't hesitate to seek out professional assistance when necessary.